Welcome to the CCN podcast, where we discuss the latest trends, companies, and people shaping the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Jake Sylvester. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the fourth episode of the show. This week, we've finally seen some upward price movement in the markets. Two new Ethereum games have launched. Coinbase is adding more institutional clients. Block.one has yet another investment round. And finally, we finish off with an interview with co-founder of NEM, Jeff Mcdonald. So first up, the price increases. Bitcoin rallied this week and is now up 18%. The altcoins followed a little slower, with Ethereum only being up 5% and the entire coin market cap up around 11%. So why is this happening? First of all, we've seen a lot of institutional money come in this week. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but aside from what I'm going to tell you about some new developments with Coinbase, I've also been told off the record by a number of people that lots of over-the-counter trades are happening with big investors, 150,000 Bitcoins being traded all at once. This volume might not be readily apparent on the exchanges, but someone is selling them this Bitcoin. And a lot of the time, to make up for some of these non-even numbers, they're buying this Bitcoin on the exchanges. That's why we're seeing a ton of volume this week that's led to such a big price increase. Also, we've had some pretty prominent bears come out of hibernation. Barry Silbert, the founder of the gigantic digital currency group, speculated this week that the price of Bitcoin has finally bottomed out. Only time will tell whether or not Barry was right, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens to this momentum over the course of the week. You got to remember, if you look at the charts for this week, a lot of the price gains we made were really made within a 24-hour period. So it's not like we saw sustained growth. What we are seeing now is the price being propped up by a lot of volume, which of course is always a good thing. But I'm really going to be watching the prices closely this week to see if we end up back where we started. Moving on, we had two interesting game announcements this week, both on the Ethereum blockchain. So the Major League Baseball has announced that they're going to be launching an MLB crypto DApp game. The game's aimed at creating marketing toward millennials who have largely shunned baseball, and has resulted in record low turnouts at baseball stadiums around the country. Going on to a much older game, Go, the 4,200-year-old Chinese game that's often compared to chess, is launching a blockchain-based online competitive game. The game, being launched by the Blockchain Inc. in partnership with Lee Sedol, who is the world champion of Go, is expected to launch within the year. One of the things I find interesting about putting Go on the blockchain is there's no real reason to have an immutable ledger when it comes to Go. And this is something the author brought up in the article I read when I was preparing for this segment. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what kind of adoption there is, if any, of this type of game, even with a big name like Lee Sedol behind it. One app that did launch this week came out of the Kin Foundation and is called the Kinit app. The app is currently in beta and is the first app that fully utilizes the Kin cryptocurrency. Kin was founded by the creator of Kick and raised over $100 million in an ICO. One of the reasons the Kinit app is interesting is with Kick's existing user base, Kin and Kinit has the potential to easily become the largest, most used consumer-facing cryptocurrency. Moving on, finance firm BlackRock, which manages $6.3 trillion in assets, was reported this week as having an internal blockchain and cryptocurrency research group. The development, while not surprising, is a real indication of the power cryptocurrencies have inside of the big institutional investors. Even if we aren't hearing about it, I would be really surprised to find any large institutional investor that didn't have a group working on exploring cryptocurrencies and blockchain. It's just too big of a risk not to. Speaking of large institutional investors, Coinbase has really been killing it lately, and they've just announced they've added an unnamed $20 billion hedge fund this week. I feel like I've been saying it every week. Coinbase is going to bring institutional money in, and I feel like they really have been. And maybe we even saw that in the prices this week with this really rapid surge. Coinbase also received approval this week for 3 acquisitions that bring it a lot closer to becoming a broker firm and being able to offer security tokens. I think this is a real comment on the level of executive talent at Coinbase that they've been able to build just in the last few years. It'll be really interesting to see where they end up as far as assets under management go at the end of the year. And I think it's going to have a big impact on crypto prices as we move forward. Next up, Block.one, the company behind EOS, raised even more money this week from both Peter Thiel and Bitmain. The company has already raised $4 billion. So the question a lot of people have been asking is, what exactly are they doing with the money? No one knows yet, but as someone who personally reveres Peter Thiel and really respects what Bitmain's been able to build, I think they've got something big planned. Speaking of Bitmain, they've been seeking to diversify prior to their IPO, and this investment is just one part of that strategy. Another part is that they opened a 20,000 square foot office in San Jose. Some have speculated the move is to be close to a bunch of crypto companies such as Coinbase, but I think it's more likely that this has to do with Silicon Valley's obsession with machine learning and Bitmain's entire offering of machine learning as they choose to expand in that industry. Bitmain's also been expanding in Israel, nearly tripling their staff in the country. They're not the only crypto company expanding, with Bithumb announcing they were opening 2 new offices in Thailand and Japan. If Bithumb sounds familiar, it's because 2 weeks ago, we discussed that they had been hacked for the 3rd time in the last 12 months. So some have questioned the timing of opening these new offices. The reason for the locations, however, is clear. Thailand has a very loose regulatory environment that's conducive to cryptocurrencies, and e-commerce has been booming in the country. Japan, on the other hand, presents a big opportunity because local exchange Coincheck has been hacked. Oh, the irony. Finally this week, we have an interview with NEM co-founder Jeff Mcdonald. I'm going to warn you up front that this interview is a little more technical than you may be used to, but I feel like this level of detail is necessary as we start interviewing more people from infrastructure coins. I really had a good time interviewing Jeff, and I learned a lot about his vision from NEM. We also talked a lot about how he got into crypto, what he saw the industry come from, and where he sees it going. I really hope you guys enjoy this interview, and let me know if there's anyone that you would like me to interview in the future. Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm here with Jeff Mcdonald, an advisor to the NEM Foundation. How you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm glad to have you here. NEM is obviously one of the top coins out there right now. So tell us a little bit about what NEM does and the problem NEM solves.
NEM is a blockchain that works really well for people that are trying to deliver their projects. And what I mean by that is the network's not really ever had any problem. We have these super great features that are able to for developers to integrate. These are smart programmable assets. We call those mosaics. We have this wonderful multi-sig contract. And all of this is connected by an API that developers can just add and build an app. So I like to say that NEM is like the Apple of the blockchain world, because any first-year developer can build an app on Apple, and the same is true with NEM.
That's really cool. So I guess you guys haven't experienced a lot of the congestion problems that a network like Ethereum has?
We have not. The NEM network has been, I would say, not used as much as I would like. But yeah, we've had no CryptoKitty app come in and kill our blockchain. And to be fair to Ethereum, it's not just Ethereum. Any blockchain that has a killer app will run into the same problem that Ethereum did with CryptoKitty. And NEM's not immune. Bitcoin's had that problem. It could literally happen to anybody. And it doesn't really matter how many transactions per second a blockchain does. If it's 100 transactions or 1,000 transactions or 1,000,000 transactions, the moment you make a blockchain with 1,000,000 transactions is the moment that some huge dApp maker figures out how to do a dApp that's going to eat up 1,000,000 transactions, and it's going to fill up the chain.
So as an engineer, and with your technical background, how do you solve for that? Obviously, in a traditional network environment, you could throw more servers at it behind a load balancer. You can't really do that in a decentralized network. So how do you solve that issue?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I haven't heard a lot of people go that techie before. The servers and the balancers work for like light clients just trying to check their data. Right. So a lot of people are just opening their app and they're just looking to see what their balance is, right? Or checking the price, or, maybe looking at their CryptoKitties and seeing if it grew up more. And so there is some load balancer way that you could solve that. But when it comes to core transactions, load balancers is exactly like you said, they don't solve that. And one of the reasons why I'm excited about our Catapult blockchain update is because it has this new tiered architecture where it does allow people to do a load balancer type server type thing for light clients to get data. We have this great MongoDB and API server, which is a dream for developers. But to your original question, what happens is the industry as a whole needs to find out how to have better off-chain solutions. And so Lightning Network for Bitcoin is this really cool solution that Bitcoin's looking at. And Bitcoin basically does one thing really well, and that is be Bitcoin and send Bitcoins. Everybody that tries to build all these apps on top of Bitcoin, they basically run into all kinds of problems. There's other platforms like NEM or Ethereum or EOS that's going to be way better at people building their apps, right? And so Bitcoin has this solution for making Bitcoin go off-chain. And if the Lightning Network's successful for Bitcoin, that's their answer. That's how they've done it. They've basically made Bitcoin gold of the internet, and the Lightning Network becomes like check cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, and people are paying with those, and it becomes cheap and fast and easy. But then we have the world of dApps and people building rich applications on top of the blockchain. And that's not just quite as simple as make a Lightning Network. So NEM's answer to this is basically hybrid chains. And we have this amazing cross-chain transaction that the developers have done. And this is something that like a lot of blockchain platforms talk about. We do cross-chain, we're really good at it. And then you say, okay, let me test it out. And they say, well, it's a theory, we're going to have it. It's on the roadmap. The NEM developers have done this cross-chain transaction. It's built into the SDK. It's a line to one line of code for a developer to make a transaction on one chain to another chain. And so what we can do is really one of the best ways to scale off-chain dApps or to scale dApps at a big scale is to give them onto a consortium chain, chain maybe with like 15 or 20 or 30 trusted nodes of different people running that chain. And then you get thousands of transactions per second on them. And if you really need to, and you want to move that security or that value, you can put it back over to the main chain, or you could even do both. Like for instance, price of a lock. Again, a lock is not Bitcoin, right? But we can imagine that someday we're going to need blockchain to secure the important locks of the world. But how many times does a door get unlocked? 2 times a second, 10 times a second, 100 times a second? No, this is what I'm talking about. 1,000,000 times a second. Doors need to be unlocked across the world. So how do we handle that? Well, in NEM, what you would do is you'd put the contract for who owns that door, who has admin rights on a public chain, and then you would repeat that contract on a private chain, and you'd have the private chain checking into the public chain to make sure the state of the validity of that contract is valid on the public chain. But every time that door is locked or unlocked, you put that on a private chain. And you have all those records, you know who locked it, and you have a full record for that lock. And then you can scale up to thousands of transactions per second. And that's one way that we solve this problem with the hybrid chains in NEM.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I'm just going to explain this a little bit first before I make my point. So I guess in the traditional world, right, we talked a little bit about load balancers, but there's also the idea of caching, which is basically if I know Jeff is going to access, if he's on Facebook and I know he's going to access his profile picture and his name every day, I'm going to put that in memory where it's very accessible. So you're talking about setting up a side chain for more data. In the blockchain and in the NEM world, is there any concept of a type of application cache where data that's accessed more frequently is less expensive to access?
So first of all, NEM was designed so that, like, I know other people have looked at decentralized APIs, and I'll mention that NEM had a decentralized API on day one when it launched. And that API has worked flawlessly. Now, when Catapult came out, the developers kind of realized cache is important, but also how you access that information is incredibly important. So traditionally in a blockchain, the way you look up information is with a transaction hash. And that is an awful way for somebody to check information that needs to be checked every day. Imagine every time you pull up your app and it's looking for transaction hash, right? So what NEM does with Catapult is there's a 4-layer architecture. The bottom layer has been designed just to do peer-to-peer transactions and put that in that secure database sequentially. That's secured with cryptography, one block after the next, in a nice sequence. But then we make another server, which is a MongoDB server, which has an API server built into it, which is kind of what you're talking about. And MongoDB is wonderful, because it takes all that information in the blockchain that you normally can't access very well, puts it in a MongoDB, and this is like a dream come true for a lot of developers. They know Mongo, they know how it works, it has all their data, and it has these great APIs supporting it. And then on top of our MongoDB and our API server, we give a lot of great SDKs in the common languages that developers are writing in. So they're getting everything that they want in this type of system.
Yeah, it's a really crazy concept. And by the way, for the listeners that don't know, MongoDB is kind of the latest iteration of the database. So years and years ago, the standard when you were making a new application was something called SQL. And it was this database server, kind of clunky. You've probably written tens of thousands of queries in it. And then along came MongoDB and said, no more of this crazy query stuff. And it's almost like writing a Google query on a data structure where you can say, I want to look up this piece of data in this piece of the structure. And since then, it's kind of become the standard for web development. And the older enterprises like Facebook, we were talking about a second ago, still rely heavily on SQL. But it's really become the next generation of databases, which is why what I think NEM's approach is so interesting. You're saying, I don't want developers to learn all this new crazy technology, Solidity, basically a new paradigm for writing code, right? Mm-hmm. I want them to be able to write code in the way they're comfortable doing and basically act like they're writing code on any other centralized platform.
Yeah. I mean, the NEM developers are really, developers that are building for other developers. And they know exactly what developers want. And this is how it was made. It was like, their goal was to make an ideal platform that other developers can build on. And they've done something else really cool. NEM Catapult is the only blockchain with plugins. And it gets a little bit technical, but all of a sudden, if you're a new developer and you're looking at the Catapult code and there's a certain type of smart transaction that we don't support, you can actually build that transaction type yourself and make it as a plugin. So no longer are the days where a developer is like, I need a blockchain that's going to do supply chain or emissions of extra tokens, or I need a blockchain that's going to be a voting blockchain. And they have to go and build their whole blockchain from scratch. They can just take Catapult now and design one little plugin, and now they have the blockchain of their dreams.
Yeah, and I know it's a bit more of a technical explanation, but can you explain a little bit how that differs from like issuing a new ERC20 token and then creating, I think supply chain was a great example there, creating a blockchain to deal with supply chain? Yeah,
so I'm a big fan of Ethereum. I'll qualify this statement. And I love the idea of Ethereum. Ethereum's idea is actually not necessarily to make a blockchain. A lot of people get that confused. NEM is to make a blockchain, and I'll explain why I think those two things are a little different. Ethereum's goal is to make a world decentralized computer. And in that world decentralized computer, the idea is to make a program where you can write your own program and nobody can ever turn that program off. Nobody can censor it. And it runs trustlessly. It's the first time ever that there's ever been a computing device that you can launch your application on it, and you know that that program will always run and can never be turned off and can never be censored. That's good and bad. It comes with the downside that if you make a program on Ethereum and you don't write it correctly, you can never turn your program off, and you can never stop it. And this is where a lot of programs have problems. And people talk about the ERC20 standard, right? But what people are really doing is they're taking this decentralized computer, this Ethereum virtual machine, and they're writing a program inside of the virtual machine. And the program basically says, hey, program, act like a token. Or, hey, program, act like a calculator. And if it basically says, if you were a token, what would you do? And this is a whole application that's running in this virtual machine. Think of it as like an OS, right? The problem is that sometimes that application is programmed correctly and it correctly acts like a token. And sometimes it's not programmed correctly and it doesn't act like a token. And that's when you get projects that explode. Or like a multi-sig contract. You write this application in the virtual machine, and sometimes it acts like a multi-sig contract, and sometimes it doesn't. And all your tokens get locked up forever, or they get hacked, right? And this is a classic example in Ethereum called like the parity hacks. Not one, but two hacks. And the discussion is like, hopefully they're going to hard fork Ethereum. And that's the hope. Like if your application goes wrong, your best hope is to call Vitalik and say, hey, whenever you do the update for Casper, are you going to let me fix this bug in this program? And maybe he will, and maybe he won't. I think as time goes by and Ethereum becomes less experimental and more enterprise, the answer is going to be no. So that's Ethereum. That's how most other contracts are working. NEM is different. in NEM, when you make a token, you're using this plugin architecture, and your token gets native token status. So your token is no different than, say, Zim, which is the first token. We call them all mosaics. And because that plugin works directly as a part of the blockchain, and then it's directly a part of consensus of every transaction. And so it's a little different. In NEM, you just have a token that is a token on the native blockchain. In other platforms, you have this virtual machine, which is really, really wonderful, especially for some use cases. But maybe it's a bit of overkill if you just want to make a token.
Yeah, it's the difference between basically a whole Turing-complete computer and you guys being an application on that computer. That's very customizable and extensible. Yes.
We're just customizable adaptions that you can plug in versus making a whole Turing-complete computer. The level of complexity of what Ethereum has done is absolutely amazing. And I have no doubt in my mind, as it's battle tested and as they work out these bugs, it will go on to be a very successful platform. But if you just want to make a token and you want to make sure that your token never breaks and is very solid, that's NEM. We have a multi-sig contract, multiple multi-sig contracts that launched before Ethereum launched. Those multi-sig contracts were with NEM on day one, and at one point had more than $1 billion in them. And those contracts have stood the test of time. It's because the NEM architecture is fundamentally different and safer and more secure. Something about like a NEM a transaction. So instead of like announcing a transaction, having to go through a virtual machine, calculate all these complicated things, and then send it down to the blockchain, NEM transactions are announced as JSON RESTful APIs. And the JSON is announced to the network. And I explain it basically like this. When you go to www.google.com and you click enter, that's an API call to a server on the internet. And that server either answers that call or it doesn't. And so you either get google.com or you get this web page that says did not load, contact your internet, something's a matter, right? And you don't ever type in www.google.com and you get Microsoft, right? And that's because APIs are very, very black and white. They either get read and processed exactly as they're announced or they don't. And that's NEM. You do all the smart, hard part of signing a contract on your client side, and then the JSON gets announced to the network, and the network says, okay, thumbs up or thumbs down. Let's make this happen or let's not.
Yeah, so definitely a lot less complicated for everyone involved, right? The programmers, and depending on how the user interface is set up, the users too.
Yeah, definitely. It's great. And so we're starting to see this catch on. I mean, literally almost every day, a new project that I wasn't aware of pops up in my feed that's building on NEM. And, I feel like that's kind of how Ethereum was in 2016. And then in 2017, Ethereum became overwhelming, that there was just so many projects that popped up every day that you couldn't even keep track of them all, even if you wanted. And like now, I can honestly say, I don't know a lot of projects that are being built on NEM. And I don't even know all the people in the NEM Foundation. Literally last night, someone came up to me and was like, hey, your NEM guy's in town at this conference. And I was like, oh, I don't know who that guy is. I mean, this is how big the foundation's grown. And people are coming up and they're telling me about their apps being built on NEM, and I've never even heard of the app. And then I go and I look at it, and it's an amazing website with a wonderful team doing a real project. And I'm like, how did I not know about these guys? And so that's kind of where we're at. We're not the biggest. We're definitely not the most famous. But because of our architecture, we are gaining traction. And there are real projects that are rolling out on NEM.
Yeah, and it's definitely got to be crazy to see your project go from really a few guys, right, to to being this huge thing with this foundation where you don't even know everybody. So how did you get started, and what was it like to experience that kind of growth?
Oh, man. I was just a regular guy, right? I was working in South Korea. I had student loans in America like everybody else. I had to pay off my student loans. I was sending money back from Korea to America, $1,000 a month. And I was just trying to pay off the loans as quickly as possible. And I was spending $50 every month in bank fees. Found out I could send that money overseas with Bitcoin. Back then, we were sending zero fee transactions on Bitcoin. The promise was like, send as much money as you want forever, right? And then we found out that there was problems scaling. But back then, it was awesome because I totally cut out the bank and was saving money, $50 out of every 1,000. That was 5%. Right? Like, over the course of a year, I was getting half of a month's payments for free by doing that. And I was pretty mind blown and by the idea of Bitcoin. Still love Bitcoin. I want to see it become the money of the world. Right. And I want to see that promise fulfilled. But then I got into, if Bitcoin can do this for money, what can blockchain do for anything else? Because the blockchain is really a database. Your bank has your money on its database, just like Bitcoin has your money on the blockchain. But there's databases for identity, for tickets, for your diplomas, for logistics, for supply chain, for everything. And I was like, wow, if blockchain in Bitcoin can revolutionize money, what can blockchain do for everything else? Because literally there's databases everywhere keeping track of all this money and all this information. Sometimes information is more valuable than money. And that sounds weird, but like your identity, your name, your social security number, where you live, that's not money, but it's worth more than money. And how do we know? Because people are willing to pay money and give up their money for your identity on the darknet. Yeah, it's pretty unreal. And so, we need to think of ways that we can have better security as human beings with all this information that's in our database. The elections in America are a classic example. People were mined on Facebook. Election machines were hacked because election machines are databases too. Now, will we ever find out if the election machines were definitely compromised and votes changed? We won't ever know. But if it was a blockchain database securing those voting machines, we will know. What we know for a fact is that people tried. People tried to tamper with the machines, but we don't know for a fact that they were actually compromised or not.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest parts of the blockchain, right? The whole immutability piece of it. One of the other things I've always been most intrigued by is the idea of kind of homomorphic data processing, and I'm going to define that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So basically the idea that you can have an entity or a number of computers, right, process data without knowing what the data is. So kind of like a zero knowledge proof, but for data processing.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things I've always been really intrigued by is the idea that you could take like an entire PHP application, right? A standard, let's use Facebook in 2006 as an example, a simple social network, put it on some kind of blockchain platform, and have it be able to process data and run as a whole social network without anyone at Facebook being able to see that data, being able to access the database, or really tamper with it in any way. Is that something you think NEM could do now?
We have no plugin for zero knowledge transactions. That's not to say that we can't and that some wonderful developer, I've actually thought about that. One of the problems with NEM is that it's an account-based system, and proof of importance is tagged with the accounts, which makes it kind of hard if you're mining to be anonymous because your account has to be announced to the network. That being said, if there was a scheme that was implemented where addresses were changed every time, and a zero knowledge transaction was used, and all the coins were mixed. And inherently, account-based systems are better than UTXO. Bitcoin is UTXO for mixing coins, because in a UTXO system, you trace a coin through the chain. But with an account-based system, you just transfer a balance. And so literally every transaction, all coins are mixed within your own account. So a talented developer that figures out how to mix all transactions within a block that get passed through it, and so all the coins are mixed, and then you change addresses, and then you add zero knowledge to that. I see those three things having to be added to a catapult chain to make it be able to serve the purpose that you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, this is why we're here. I want to see a world where people aren't mining your data off of Facebook, that really just truly you and your friends see your data or your votes or your identity or what tickets you went to and shows you attended or something that you purchased off the internet. And people often ask me about privacy, and they say, why are you for privacy coin? NEM is not a privacy coin. And what are you trying to hide, Jeff? Right? And the funny thing is, I'm not trying to hide anything. I pay my taxes. I pay my taxes in full. It's very painful, but I do it. And the thing is, I'm not trying to hide anything. I just don't want my whole life to be an open book. I don't want a media reporter to be able to go look at a blockchain and publish a story and say, this is exactly how much money Jeff has. Or I don't want, somebody who is reviewing my application to join the membership for their organization to figure out how much I can pay or what other organizations I've been in. Right? I don't want my whole life to be an open book. I want to have privacy just so I have my privacy. Now, if you ask me this or that and you're my friend or you're someone I trust, I don't have any problem telling you anything about my life. I'm not hiding anything. I'm one of the most open people. NEM people will tell you that. Sometimes I'm often too blunt, right? But I would rather have the privacy knowing that my life is not an open book. And so that's why I'm completely a fan of these people that are making these Anon coins, and I'd love to see their projects be successful. It is true that right now they're being used a lot of times for dark market and questionable services that I don't necessarily support. But the idea as a whole, I think, is something that humanity is going to need in the future. Because otherwise, we have a choice, and it's coming. You either have your whole life mined, and it's an open book to people that are willing to pay to manipulate that data, or you get privacy. And I think that there's some downfalls of privacy, but the upsides are way more important.
So you're not Satoshi?
I am not Satoshi. I don't know Satoshi. But I'll tell you who I do know. I know Nick Szabo. He won't ever remember meeting me or talking to me, but I used to write messages on his blog way back in the day before Bitcoin was big, and I actually met him one time for like 15 seconds, and I was like, oh, Nick Szabo, you're the best, right? And that guy is a genius, and he wrote these amazing blogs. He's an intellectual force, and whether he is or is not Satoshi, he says he's not. I most likely believe him. But that being aside, he is like this brilliant mind that was able to combine economics, data science, history, all these different things, and combine them together and write these blogs of connecting all these dots. And just his blogs alone, I think he deserves way more credit than what he is given in the whole blockchain industry. If you go back and look at his early blogs, they're absolutely amazing. To think, like, how could this guy have known about law and computers and then come up with the idea for a smart contract when Bitcoin was only like 6 months old? You gotta be kidding me, right? Like, he had mentally envisioned Ethereum before almost anybody had ever heard of Bitcoin. That's how advanced his thought cycles are. It's revolutionary. Yeah.
Yeah. that whole the whole group that was around back then is just a force to be reckoned with intellectually.
Oh man, yeah, they're just amazing guys, right? So they're like, some people think I've been around for a while, but I still consider myself like a newbie compared to some of those original guys. I'm a little bit weird because I love to go back to the early Bitcoin talk and like look at the conversations that Satoshi was having and who he was talking to and like the people that like he was talking to, and later on they went on to make their own blockchain, right? And that became worth billions of dollars. Like nobody knew what these guys were going to do back then. Nobody knew that that was coming. Everybody, even like Satoshi himself, if you read the original white paper, he's like, this will probably work. And if it's like this should happen. Like he didn't know. He was guessing. But to be able to guess on your first time and guess right, and the fact that Bitcoin is still here today and it didn't just like explode and then we had to start over from scratch and use a completely new one, that's mind-blowing that they came out of the gates. And so it's pretty exciting. You know, I love listening to these old timers talk.
Yeah, it's incredible. And by the way, my question about the whole homomorphic, that's me kind of taking advantage of this podcast to explore what I think is probably the biggest potential of the blockchain.
Right?
Which is just we've got tens of thousands, millions of lines of code right now, and taking that, maybe even potentially changing it a little bit with an SDK, like moving from SQL to MongoDB. And coming out with these fully decentralized applications that might even be cheaper to run, right? If we get some of these phone decentralized systems up, some Pied Piper type stuff. If you're a fan of Silicon Valley,
yeah. I've seen some of the episodes. I need to catch up on all of them, but yeah, exactly. Right, making the new internet. And people joke, like, I don't think blockchain will ever be bigger than the internet because inherently blockchain is a part of the internet, right? And there's always going to be other parts of the internet, like streaming Netflix, right? That may or may not incorporate blockchain, But when I look at blockchain, I'm looking at this radical revolution that is going to fundamentally change the way that we structure our society. And privacy has to be one of those things. But like I've designed this contract where you can basically put a whole government on the blockchain. And I'm waiting for the last plugins to be delivered so that we can make that happen. Right. And it's not just government. Literally everything. The blockchain could be secure in it. And we're not there yet. But remember, when the internet first came out, the very first video that was ever launched on the video was these guys who had like a rock band. Like they recorded themselves and they did a concert. And this was way, 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 way back in the day. And afterwards, a local news reporter interviewed these guys and said, hey, do you think that this is going to become a big thing, that people are going to stream music over the internet? And the guy was like, nah, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like we took up like half of the internet bandwidth with this video. Like nobody's ever going to be able to do that ever again. And then now we know like what the internet became. When I think of blockchain in 30 or 40 years from now and all the utility it's going to provide, I think we'll get there. I think that we'll get privacy and transparency, but auditability at the same time. And, it's going to just fundamentally make the world a better place because we'll have less corruption and we'll have systems that are cheaper to run and provide more utility.
Yeah, and that's a really great vision for the future. So that's 30, 40 years out. Where do you see yourself and the NEM Foundation in 5 years?
Wow. NEM Foundation has blockchain centers in every major city of the world in 5 years from now. We started with our first in KL, Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. It's 10,000 square feet. It's this huge blockchain center. Yeah, we have a couple more that have opened up in Australia recently. I need to double check the press releases on that. We're building them out. I think Texas will get one by the end of the year. Europe should have some. And I'm looking at 5 years. Literally every major city has a NEM blockchain center. The foundation, each country has, hundreds or thousands of employees. And I'm not going to say that NEM's going to be the biggest blockchain or the best blockchain. But if you ask me if we're going to be around in 5 years, I can say definitively, yes. We have the people. We have the resources. We've already been around for, since January of 2014 is when NEM started. So, 4.5 years. It's been 3.5 years, or more than 3 years for launch. So are we going to be here in 5 years? Yes. We're going to be much bigger. We're going to be much stronger. And by then, it's not going to be just one project a day that's launched on NEM. It's going to be hundreds. And we can't keep track of them all, right? And so these are the days right now when I look back and I say, I remember when I could know almost every leader of every NEM project at some point, right? And by then it's just going to be too hard, right? Way too hard.
It's going to be like Bezos knowing every AWS customer.
Yeah, it just can't happen. And, by that time, I want to silently step away. I feel like this is the most exciting time when things are building up, but when NEM gets to be too big, I want to just kind of be like one of those actors that did 2 great movies and then it's like, acting's not for me. I'm just going to go live a normal life, right? I don't ever want to be as famous as Vitalik is or some of these other people that are in the blockchain industry. Like when I go home, wherever that might be, I like to be pretty anonymous and keep my privacy. I don't do meetups in my hometown or anywhere near my hometown. I don't tell people. Like when I go home, I tell people, they ask me, what's your job? And I say, I'm in database security. And that basically just stops the conversation right there, right? Nobody asked me any more questions. It's like the most boring title ever, right? Right? Because, fundamentally, I believe that we should have our privacy. But when I'm on the road, I do conferences. Obviously, there's tons of videos of me on YouTube. And I'm doing that until I feel like, NEM has grown and there's just so many people that are way better than me that there's no point in me even hanging around. So, and I hope that day comes soon.
Yeah, it's certainly an awesome vision. And yeah, I'd really like to thank you for coming on, talking to me, answering some of my fantasy questions about the future of blockchain. And I'm really excited about what NEM's doing and what some of these less Ethereum-like projects are doing that are more focused on. Like you said before, if you look at it as a computer, Ethereum's kind of the kernel, right, or the operating system. And then on top of that, you've got all these fantastic projects that are becoming really accessible to developers. And I'm really excited to see what products move over to this decentralized model, how companies like Facebook, Google, and these other companies that have made hundreds of billions of dollars off mining your data do, and how that changes the world.
Well, make no mistake, all of those companies are definitely looking into blockchain right now. They all have teams that are looking into blockchain, and they're looking at ways 10 years down the road, how are they going to make their own blockchain? How are they going to incorporate it into their business model? And they want to hold on to that data. But then there's the new guys that are going to be like, hey, I won't keep your data. Come join me. And so a battle's coming, and a lot of disruption is coming. And it's going to be exciting to see where we go. So yeah, great. We should have another podcast where we just talk about that. The future, the big future of blockchain 5 and 10 years down the road. I'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was awesome talking to you. What I love to talk about, and what it kind of sounds like you like to talk about, is just the technology and how it's going to change things.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here, to see that happen.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are only those of its hosts and guests, and sometimes of no one at all. The CCN podcast was produced by Rockwood Audio and hosted by ccn.com. To find out more about CCN and the podcast, check us out at ccn.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CryptoCoinsNews. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe.